Chapter 1. Zippity, Zappity. The Earth year is designated as 1740. Part 1.1. The 1260 years. Aboard the exploration space vessel out past the 10th planet, a new scouting mission was being prepared. 2 scouts would be sent to the planet Earth. Their mission was part anthropological, in that the scouts, working separately at different locations, would need to study the customs, culture, art, politics, and religion of the indigenous peoples of the Earth. In addition to this information gathering, the agents would also need to instill particular ideas that would be of use at a later time. They would have to introduce the new information to the people without allowing it to appear obvious. It would be half propaganda and half inspirational litany. The process was simple. The scout enters the society and attempts to quickly adapt as fully as possible. The spoken and written language must be learnt as well as customs, common body language, religious observances, and popular expressions. It is important for the agent to blend into the background while gradually acquiring a more integrated role in the society. As greater responsibilities are taken upon them, increased influence in human affairs will be possible. As more contacts are made amongst the indigenous peoples, the scout can assist those who are working, sometimes unknowingly, for the same cause. The specifics, however, might vary from agent to agent. The first alien scout was named Zippity. However, on Earth, his name would be Edward. Agent Zippity was chosen for the mission because of his accomplishments. He was recommended by his training managers as being one of the most promising reconnaissance scouts since the renowned scouts of yesteryear first discovered this solar system. The people of Earth in those ancient times were quite different than they were now. The primary differences were technological, but other changes had occurred. Zippity was familiar with early human culture, but he'd have to adapt quickly to the new standards or else be viewed as an outsider or as a heretic. He had often amazed his trainers in his ability to take any challenge and approach it with a sense of wonder and delight. The second alien scout was named Zappity. On Earth, though, Zappity would have to play the role of the human male named Fernando. Zappity had been scouting for years, and was quite determined to be part of the current Earth mission. Zappity was quite interested in returning to Earth after a failed mission 30 years earlier. He had been too ambitious and too sure of his ability. These traits in particular stood out amongst the indigenous peoples. He had been tried and executed as a heretic. Although his human costume had been destroyed, he survived the incident and returned to the mothership out beyond the 10th planet. For Zappity, returning to Earth and completing his newest mission was personally significant. He was determined to succeed and restore his honor in the process. The briefing officer was explaining some of the thinking that led to the current plan. While the people are fearful of anything that is even minutely unfamiliar, it will remain impossible to contact more than a very small few. If we plant our information seeds now, we can hope for a window of opportunity in the future when more of the people are receptive to us than there is now. We know this approach works because it has worked on every planet that we have peacefully integrated into our gentle empire. Zappity said, "Hail our gentle Caesar." Zippity and the briefing officer struck their chests with their fists and then gave the centurion salute, "Hail gentle Caesar." Returning to the details of the mission, Zippity asked the briefing officer how many information seeds will be necessary to make someone sufficiently receptive to our goals. "It depends on the model," the briefing officer explained. "Some would need 65,536 encounters with our new information strain. Someone else might require 131,072 instances. We understand that this is a long-term project, and it is not meant to be completed in a mere day." Zippity asked, "How many days has this project been given?" The briefing officer answered, "The timetable is plotted for 360 days. Of course, on Earth, one of our days is equal to one of their years." "So," Zappity said, 360 Earth years Correct, the briefing officer said, plus or minus 40 years. This was Zippity's first important mission. Up until then, he had merely participated in test exercises that imitate the circumstances common to scouts. His trainers had indicated him as the leading trainee of his class, but he had yet tested all of the theory involved in the process. He knew the material from reading electronic reports and listening to lectures from robot tutors. Zippity wasn't worried about his responsibility, however, as his confidence was good, but his humility lent some restraint. He wouldn't rush into the mission. He would study the locals carefully for a while and then become more involved, only after he felt comfortable imitating them. He planned to practice their hand gestures and facial emotes when he was alone. Zappity had been to Earth on previous missions. He also had successfully undertaken missions on other planets. The Gentle Empire continued to grow in size and reach across the galaxy. There was never a need for a militaristic invasion of a planet. Instead, by the time the groundwork had been completed, the leaders of 4 agent of the Gentle Empire with new technology, the target world, would be quite happy to join the Gentle Empire by choice, and not through any form of coercion whatsoever. The trick was to wait until the analysts were certain that a given planet was fully ripe, so to speak. The ripeness was measured by the sincere desire of the leaders and general population of the planet to enter the Gentle Empire. Were the offer to join the Gentle Empire given too early, the target planet might respond with negative emotions such as fear and/or anger. Zippity and Zappity were going to Earth to help it ripen within the 360 Earth years designated, plus or minus 40. Many more scouts would be sent to Earth over this time frame, and at different locations. They would eventually integrate into all of the different groups of people and separate nations. These forward advanced scouts would plant the information seeds, so that the humans of the future would become more compatible with their way of thinking. The agents wouldn't spread their message through coercion. They would have to provide it in a format that was readily acceptable and possibly desirable. The people would have to be able to experience the idea of it before it could become real to them. The people had to know it before they could have it as their reality. Part 1.2. Fernando Zappity has landed. Zappity, in the role of Fernando, landed in a prominent city within southern Europe. He wore clothes similar to those he wore 30 years earlier during that visit to Earth. He knew that fashions would have changed, but he had no other choice other than wearing his space suit. He knew that the space suit would attract far too much attention, and that was the last thing he wanted. He could always buy more modern clothes after he arrived, but he'd need to be wearing something reasonably appropriate when he entered the clothing shop. He knew that there was a very fine line drawn between eccentricity and madness. He had to blend into the background so as not to attract too much attention from the others. Previous surveillance of this city had provided details about the common currency. Although paper money was used in some regions, the silver and gold coins were most trusted in Fernando Zappity's new home city. He brought with him a large bag filled with both gold and silver coins. He rented a room in a boarding house and purchased some paper, ink, an inkwell, and several quill pens. He had a cultural influence to insert into human consciousness. He dipped the first pen into the inkwell and prepared himself for the task. A few good ideas quickly radiated across his mind, but then it occurred to him that he wasn't familiar enough with current cultural standards. He had studied the language with its rules of grammar and style, but he hadn't investigated the popular culture of the moment. He put his pen back down and went out to retrieve research material. After a 20-minute walk across the city, he arrived at a store that offered an interesting selection of books and magazines. He bought much of the literatures available and practically ran home in excitement. He felt that his mission was already half complete. Certainly his super-intelligent alien brain could decode the cultural symbols of the local population. The planets from which the Gentle Empire was formed were all far more technologically advanced than Earth. That was the main reason why a 360-year delay was necessary for the maturation of the humans under the subtle tutelage. The people of the Earth had to be guided away from being fearful of all things alien or foreign. Eventually, they would need to learn the truth about their planet and its place in the galaxy. They would have to learn about the other planets and their people. There was too much information for the average person of 1740 to handle at once. A little information would have to be trickled out to the people in small enough increments as to not cause alarm. The reactions of the people would be closely monitored. If people were becoming overwhelmed with the startling new revelations, there would be a snap back to earlier and more nostalgic times. The temporary setback, however, always ended with a snap in the opposite direction, preparing people for more information than normal. Fernando was carefully speaking with some people from a nearby village. Having been executed as a heretic during his last mission to Earth, Fernando knew that it was important to be very conscious of what he said and what words he used. He knew that he couldn't say certain ideas aloud, but could hint at them and allow others to realize them independently. He could lead them to an understanding sixth agent of the gentle empire with new technology that he had predetermined, but it would be up to them, individually, to recognize the real message beneath the metaphors and reverse psychology. He would ask others in an innocent fashion, "Have you seen strange lights moving in the sky?" If they had, he would ask them, "What do you think they were?" If someone preferred to ignore the encounter than to speculate over it, Fernando would provide suggestions. "Maybe it was an angel flying through the sky. Do you think it was an angel?" If the lights had caused fear in the seer, Fernando would ask, "Do you think that you saw a demon flying through the air?" He never indicated to anyone that these lights might be caused by a space-faring vessel that was piloted by a person such as himself. Instead, he always attached a piece of accepted supernatural interpretation to the phenomena. He wanted to romanticize the lights in the sky, but in such a way that would create both awe and reverence for the source of the lights. He had to promote a precedent that would benefit the scouts who would arrive later in larger numbers. The supernatural quality of these lights in the sky was not to be doubted. It was that the lights were nothing to be feared. These strange lights would eventually be revealed for what they really were: alien spacecraft. It wasn't long before people started spreading rumors about the lights in the sky. The consensus seemed to indicate that these lights were supernatural creatures. The exact nature of the lights was uncertain, but there was no doubt that their overall form was mystical and difficult to describe. Within time, there would be more sightings as unrelated natural events produced phenomena mistaken for supernatural creatures. Famous painters such as Leonardo da Vinci had years earlier been inspired to include spacecraft in the sky with people staring and pointing at them. However, the rumors also asked if these lights were not merely supernatural, but divinely created to send a blessing or a warning to the people. Wasn't it the prophet Ezekiel who witnessed the wheel of lights in the sky? He described what he saw as wheels, but they did not move. Yet, the wheels could travel in any of the four directions, apparently being capable of hastily changing directions. It also had vertical takeoff and landing functionality. Some people saw these lights in the sky as a blessing. Others saw them as a terrible portent regarding events soon to impinge on their lives. Fernando fueled both sides of the argument with contradictory statements. The lights were caused by wheels piloted by angels inflicted with demons. Can the angels overcome their demons and rise above them to do the work of their divine master? Some would have the faith necessary to see the angels through to the end result. Others applied fear, and the demons were strengthened by lack of resistance. In this sense, Fernando Zappity wasn't capable of giving a mere decree as to the outcome of the spiritual battle. Instead, he could merely comment on it and contemplate the possibilities from afar. Fernando also understood the long-term power of entertainment media. Discussing the lights in the sky with some of the local villagers could only do so much. What Fernando knew had to be done, however, was to reach a wider audience at one time. While his current credentials didn't lend themselves to a lecture tour, he could begin by writing short stories for magazines. By injecting relevant ideas into his fictional prose, he could plant the seeds of information. By using familiar characters from well-established literature, Fernando would be able to communicate with the public using cultural values and icons that were already commonly known. One of his early stories was written as a satire of Plato's dialogues, for example. By using an established format and adding some light irreverence, Fernando hoped to appeal to readers who would be more likely to read his later works as they became available. Socrates look here, it is Diadochos. If it so moves you to do so, let us hear your opinion on the virtue of friendship. Diadochos, oh, good friend, Socrates. I am glad to find you here today. I have mistakenly gambled away my money and now they are going to sell my wife and children into slavery. Please loan me some money, good friend, and I will hurry to save them. Socrates, you are then saying, please correct me if I am wrong, that a friendship such as ours should include the loaning of money. What more is friendship, would you say? Diadochos, Socrates, please, I would be most happy to discuss the virtue of friendship with you at a later time, but please, I need to save my family from slavery. They are going up for sale in under an hour. Socrates, let me ask you this, then, what would you do with the money? Would you gamble it away again or? Diadochos, no. I would deliver the money immediately, and free my wife and children. Socrates, but the money you had earlier, you'd gamble that money, knowing the risk to your family. Diadochos, I saw a light in the sky. It twinkled and then leapt across from east to west. I took it as a favorable omen, and invested the money with the fate of the dice. Socrates, tell me more about these lights in the sky. Diadochos, it was dim at first, and then it began to shine with an orange or yellow glow. I knelt down and wept because I believed that it was the end. The light was orange, and then it turned yellow, and then light blue. I became calm and quiet. I felt peace in my heart and in my mind. Socrates, how do you know if this peace was caused by something within you, and not by the light in the sky? Diadochos, please, good friend, Socrates, lend me the money, so I can free my family from slavery. Socrates, you have yet to convince me of the virtue of friendship. Perhaps if you could tell me what you mean by friend, I will act accordingly. If you cannot convince me, then I will not be moved to assist you. Diadochos, I am pleading with you, dear Socrates. Please show me compassion, not just to show friendship, but to show me the compassion of a philosopher. Socrates, I agree that a philosopher has the potential for compassion, but that still does not address the virtue of friendship. I understand that you came unaware into this discussion, so I will tell you what we had already established. We considered the idea that some people must be together due to various circumstances which we attempted to list. Friends, however, choose to communicate with each other even when there is no reason beyond the social one. Diadochos, you're not listening to me, Socrates. You keep asking me to tell you about friendship, but you aren't even listening to the answers I give you. Socrates, we could divide a person's motivations along 5 distinct lines: the sex instinct, the hunger feeling, the personal satisfaction of the heart, the demons, and the reasoning of the mind. Perhaps, Diadochos, if you could indicate to me what is driving you now, I could listen you better. Diadochos, I don't understand how to indicate this to you. All I understand is that I have failed my family by losing them to my excessive gambling, and now they will be lost to me forever if I cannot pay their price. Fidelis, may I make a suggestion? I have not met your family, Diadochos, but it could be less expensive to you and your friends if you were to simply find a new wife and have new children. Diadochos, I cannot believe someone could suggest something so vile. My wife and children cannot be replaced so easily. I have grown quite accustomed to the family that I already have. They have been properly trained already. To replace them would be to return to the unpredictable scope of new behavior. Socrates, would you admit that you had made some mistakes with your wife and children? Diadochos, I can. No one can honestly say that they haven't made at least a few mistakes. Socrates, we can agree on that. Consider that, having learned from these mistakes, your next family. Diadochos, I won't even consider such a terrible suggestion. Socrates, you came to me as a friend looking for help, and then you refused to listen to my advice. Diadochos, it's not your advice that I seek. Socrates, this is unfortunate for you, because I probably could have helped you to resolve the root of your problem. Diadochos, the root. The trouble is that my wife and children are being sold into slavery as we speak. Socrates, that isn't really the root of the problem. The root of it seems to be more about how you gambled them away. If I helped you to save them today, wouldn't you be gambling them away again tomorrow? Diadochos, no, of course not. Socrates, then what is the root of your problem? Diadochos, I was convinced that I would beat the odds and win big. Socrates, why were you gambling in the first place? Diadochos, I wanted more money than I already had. Socrates, why do you want more money? Diadochos, I want to be able to buy more comfort for myself and my family. Socrates, why do you want more comfort? Diadochos, because I am uncomfortable as it is now. Socrates, the root of your problem appears quite clear to me. Your sense of comfort is in error. Instead of seeing comfort, you judge it as discomfort. Diadochos, you advise me to learn how to be comfortable even when I'm not. Socrates, you should find happiness with what you already have, because nothing is permanent. Instead of being happy with what you had, you wanted more of something else. Diadochos, even if I wanted to find comfort with what I had, I no longer have it, because my wife and children are being sold into slavery. Socrates, then find comfort in whatever it is you had left. Desire might be the root of all suffering, but the sense of discomfort is the root of all desire. Part 1.3. The Witness of Form and Color. Edward Zippity was dropped in Northern Europe and he quickly acquired a reputation as an outsider. His mannerisms were often inappropriate. His use of the language, although often correct, sounded artificial, as if memorized from a book and then repeated, as though there was no genuine understanding. People around the town assumed that Edward was visiting from another country. He was considered a very odd individual. When 36 of the locals were invited to the unveiling of a new artistic masterpiece, they were apprehensive but curious as to what this foreigner had to show them. Edward unveiled what appeared to be a canvas with 3 thick stripes of color: red, green, and blue. People asked each other, "What is it?" Someone in attendance asked with a belligerent laugh, "Is this a flag?" Edward's alien nerves were consistent and unreachable. He said with a hearty laugh, "Let me turn it on before you judge this miracle." He pressed the side of the canvas. Without delay, the thick stripes of color melted away. Some of the attendees seemed amazed already. No one was prepared for what was to occur next. It appeared that the paint was moving according to its own volition, or by the exercise of powers unknown to most. The paint began to form together and take shape. Within seconds, the paint had formed the appearance of a room with a chair and a door. Many, seeing this wonder, were more outraged than amazed. What sort of witchcraft had we witnessed? The miraculous painting hadn't stopped. The paint rearranged itself slowly to show the door opening in the room. People were gasping in shock and pointing to the obvious. The painted image of a man appeared at the doorway. Instead of being a static image as one might expect from the surface of the painting, the man seemed to move as the paint changed positions on the canvas. The animated man entered the painted room and sat on the chair. The paint closed the door behind him. Someone suggested, "We are seeing the work of the devil. Turn away your eyes, or be doomed to the eternal fiery pits of hell." However, many could not turn away their gaze. Their eyes had become transfixed by the magical canvas. Their curiosity was too strong. They had become like Lot's wife, turning to watch the destruction of Sodom, only to become a pillar of salt as a consequence. The painted door began to open again. Those who still watched the canvas saw a wild boar appear in the doorway. It swiftly entered the room, its legs moving back and forth. It seemed to be charging at the man. A woman in attendance cried out, "Someone should help him." Many of those who had turned their gaze away from the bewitched canvas were now turning back to look at what was causing all of the excitement. Edward smiled and watched the crowd's reaction. He knew that the new product was going to be a success. After the demonstration, he didn't need to look for buyers. Some of the more affluent witnesses contacted him in private and made the necessary arrangements. He had 10 self-animating paintings, and he sold all 10 within 3 days of the first and only demonstration. The lucky 10 were told that they should only watch the miraculous canvas when no one else was nearby. It was a secret, and it had to be kept hidden. Edward Zippity had explained that, while these 10 were mature enough to handle this responsibility, others would be unnecessarily frightened or angered by the canvas and its pictures. The 10 were instructed to sit in front of the animating canvas 2 to 6 hours every day. There were animated short stories about people such as themselves, and how they would one day overthrow both the church and the monarchy. In between the stories, a figure appeared, and it seemed to look out of the canvas at the watcher. It would speak directly to the watcher and provide informative tidbits. There were no instructions or suggestions. The short stories were clearly for entertainment purposes, only even if they did seem oddly anti-establishment at times. The information segments were educational and non-threatening. The lucky 10 that Edward had chosen were able to see and hear the image on the canvas, as though it had a living surface. There were recurring characters. There was a young genius who resented his gifts so much that he intentionally posed as a simpleton, so that others would find pity for him instead of being intimidated. The message of his story appeared to be that sometimes it is better to pretend that you are something that you are not, so that others won't be alarmed. Edward Zippity could relate to this story because he had to keep the truth of his identity a secret from his human contacts, or else they would be fearful of him. There was a story about a tribe of people living many kilometers to the north that came down to the south to visit with their distant cousins. Many of the situational conflicts result from differences in culture and language. Sometimes there would be a misunderstanding, and it would be humorous because of how ridiculous the people would act. They would think one thing was happening, but this would be incorrect, and the truth of it would be quite uninteresting on its own. Due to the extreme reactions of one tribe with the other, the audience was drawn into the storyline. The audience was likely to relate to one tribe or the other on an issue-by-issue basis. Sometimes the tribe from the north had a familiar custom or practice, but other times it was the tribe from the south. In this way, the audience was led to have some sympathy for both sides without seeing either as being more right than the other. The tribes were merely different. Sometimes the animated paint was very detailed in its portrayal of people and terrain, but more often the figures were more implied than literally depicted. For example, a person might not have his or her fingers individually articulated, because the story only required that the audience understand that it is a person. Fingers and a thumb, in this sense, are implied even if they weren't shown. Regardless if the show's developers were cutting corners, or if they simplified the characters for aesthetic appeal, the idea of a person was still communicated. The real miracle was that the colors of paint on the canvas appeared to move according to their own power. The figures could have contained very little detail, but it'd still have been amazing to see, because the normal canvas did not change its surface. It was amazing no matter what. Too amazing for 1740, of course. There was nothing else like it, and no other example of any kind. Gossip about the miraculous self-painting canvases spread quickly across Europe. Those who had witnessed one of them, while it was animating, had no difficulty in communicating their surprise and amazement over the device. Those merely relating the story to others couldn't communicate the sincerity or the awe. The storytellers further down the line had to rely on embellishments, invented background material, exaggerations, and sex appeal. The self-animating paintings had several stories to tell, and even the third or fifth-hand accounts were entertaining to many. Those people who did not have their own self-animating paintings simply relied on others to pass on the stories to them. Details were always lost, but sometimes new details were added to help refactor the degraded oral tradition. Eventually these stories were collected together into books for others to read. The source of these stories might have been a self-animating painting, but the readers would never know this fact, and assume the source to be merely the ordinary imagination of a human writer. Part 1.4. Symbolism. Fernando Zappity relied on humorously absurd stories to demonstrate thinking patterns that were deemed necessary for later efforts. Zappity wouldn't be the one to carry out the later stages of the plan. Instead, a clone of Zappity would arrive approximately 400 years later to perform the next step. There were others who would act according to their specific instructions, but the Zappity wasn't familiar with those details. Instead, publishing his stories in magazines allowed him to reach a wider audience. Using his alien superintelligence, he was able to adapt to the language constructs and to research a story format that would resonate well with magazine editors and readers alike. Using elaborate metaphors, Fernando Zappity was allowed to comment on the established government and church. Openly, he couldn't speak about these things without running the risk of arrest. By relying on the symbolic people and places, he was free to tell his audience what he wanted them to think on the subject. If the symbolism was vague enough, the authorities would not object to the writings. Zappity had to somehow provide a key, so that those inclined to learn the truth of the message could decode it. He had to hide the keys in other stories than the one provided, so that there was no direct connection between a key and its metaphorical story. Censors would be far less likely to discover this connection, while those people who would read his stories regularly would begin to understand the meaning over the long term. Fernando Zappity, of course, didn't invent the idea of symbolism. In fact, human literature had been home to elaborate metaphors since ancient times. Unfortunately for same humans, many of the keys to the ancient literature had been misplaced, causing untold confusion. Instead of understanding a figure of speech as being such, some of these people mistakenly took the words by their literal meaning. As one might imagine, the literal meaning might be quite different than what is being represented. The result can sometimes be comical, presumably, but other times it might be embarrassing or even tragic. A new character entered the stage, slamming the door behind him. When you've come to the edge of life, the edge between life and the beginning of death, you gain an appreciation for how trivial the other problems can be. You can come out here to the very edge, where you could die, and you know it with total certainty, and then, for some reason or another, there is an escape to more living for a time. After that point, the little obstacles are seen as just that, very plainly little and insignificant. For a few days or months, you have the power to do what seemed too intimidating or too overwhelming during earlier attempts. The housekeeper was quite offended. Dr. Whithunt, please don't speak of such matters in front of the children. One of the children was already starting to cry. The doctor yelled at the housekeeper, the children need to learn the truth now, so it'll make them that much stronger later. They can find the new enlightenment of the mind sooner than having to find it through difficult effort later. The older child asked, innocently, the new enlightenment. Oh, you are surely ignorant, the doctor laughed, but don't worry yourself over this, as I have the solution for you right here. Really, the older child asked, you have the answer? The doctor nodded. Long time ago, there was a great city called Babylon. Now, understand that the Babylonians worshipped a god that was great and powerful. They also told of another one who was almost as great as their own god, but opposed to their god. They believed that there were people in lands far away that prayed and celebrated this other god. The younger child asked, then what happened, doctor? The doctor answered quickly, it turns out that the people of Babylon were worshipping the wrong god. They had believed that their God was interested in their survival and well-being, but their God was actually the self-destructive obsession of mankind. Now the city of Babylon is no longer great and its people are scattered across the world. What about the new enlightenment? The older child asked. Oh, that, the doctor laughed. Understand that in those ancient times, the people didn't think rationally with their minds. No, they lived in a time before mankind was capable of thinking rationally over anything. Instead, it was mostly instinct with the benefit of simple communication and mathematics. They were capable of a simple form of thinking that is much different than is available today. The rational thinking man of today can plan before he takes action, and that is what allows him to build up civilization. The housekeeper seemed confused. They had to be able to think back then. They wrote the holy books, for example. The doctor nodded. They didn't write those holy books with minds that thought out the text. Today we might have people whose craft is writing, and in this crafting, as with any manner of crafting, there is planning and preparation followed by the building up of the structure. When men write today, they are writing with the thinking of their rational minds. They write because they have chosen to do so, and they write about whatever takes their fancy. Back then, the writers of those holy books were incapable of thinking rationally and acted almost impulsively, saying anything that came to their mind, writing whatever was given to them to write. Understand? They acted not in accordance of their thinking mind's planning, but through their all wills thrust into consensual reality. The younger child asked, how does the thinking mind work? Dr. Woodhunt was answering immediately upon the child's final utterance of sound. The voices debate with one another until a majority is found and then applied to the man. The voices start out separate and individual, but they form unions as common beliefs and opinions are discovered. These smaller unions form larger groups until a small number of committees are produced. These committees discuss the matter at hand and each committee proposes a solution to the others. Depending of the nature of these committees, the various answers might be taken together and only one used, or they might all be combined in a synthetic approach. Regardless of how these committees decide the outcome, the answer is spoken mentally to the source of the will that is aware. It hears a voice speaking, and this voice is the mind's thinking at it. The man then acts upon the thought, or speaks aloud, if that is what is determined to be appropriate for the occasion. The older child was curious, how does the thinking mind control the person? The thoughts are directed at the source of the will, the doctor answered. If a language is predominant to images, then the thoughts will appear as words. Language, you see, is the control mechanism available to the sources of thoughts. They can apply these words to the source of action, the free will, and expect compliance. The housekeeper was angry with the doctor, and then what exactly do you suggest is the source of these thoughts? The doctor nodded. Does the free will demand to hear the voices, or do the voices demand to be heard? That is the question. The free will shares in the responsibility, but the voices are the result of the obsessions, held so closely by the angels jostling one another as they politely take turns standing on the head of the man. What happens, the older child pondered aloud, if the angels jostle one another too erratically? The doctor explained with a smile, when their practices are unacceptable in the context of a cultural expectation, then the perpetrator must be removed from the field or else risk contaminating others. Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed for turning away from the true God, and, instead, worshipping other gods such as the god of irreverence and unnatural practices. The younger child asked, what did they do wrong? Well, the doctor tried to find a way to put into words how evil and corrupt that the great cities of Sodom and Gomorrah had become in their final decades. Their wickedness was so tremendous that I can't even speak of it without it corrupting all of us here right now. The older child said, it must have been really bad then. The doctor said to the housekeeper, as though accusing her of a misdeed, Lot's wife was turned to a pillar of salt for looking, even after being told not to look. The housekeeper said, I don't know what that has to do with me. The doctor said almost cryptically, it means you'd better do what you're told, or else you'll be punished for not obeying. Part 1.5. Visibility. The discovery of the 10 self-animating paintings was interpreted as an omen to the church officials. Perhaps, they argued, that iconoclastic considerations of the recent past were worthy of another look. Back in ancient times, the people had angered their god and church officials by worshipping painted rocks. These ancient peoples would give the rocks names and often give them gifts as a sacrifice. These rocks were merely containers, they reasoned, for a spirit. They weren't trying to appeal to the rock for assistance, but the spirit living inside of the rock was the target of their attention. The self-animating paintings were unlike mere painted rocks, in that they seemed to actually contain a spirit. While the stone carvings and statues of the past were lifeless and incapable of communication, the self-animating paintings were altogether different. They told stories with pictures. They demonstrated movement and intelligence. These miraculous paintings were somehow inhabited. Naturally, being distrustful of anything unusual, the church leaders and governmental officials were quick to denounce the magical paintings and their source, Edward Zippity. They were reminded once again of the importance of iconoclastic theories. The images themselves were idolatry manifested aloud, no matter for whom they were constructed. Even the golden calf had to be destroyed. Edward Zippity immediately went into hiding. His scout training had been quite clear. If his cover was about to be undermined, he had to escape into the night, so that his true identity would remain a mystery. The worst thing for an agent would be apprehension and the subsequent interrogation that accompanied it. In 1740, the possibilities were sometimes threatening and unpleasant. Zippity had no reason to stick it out and suffer. He would slip into the darkness of the sky from whence he was wrought and slip past the Earth's atmosphere, and out past the 10th planet where the mothership awaited him. Unfortunately, he didn't have a spacecraft of his own. He had been dropped in Northern Europe by his fellow scout, Zippity. He had to prepare for a long travel. Zippity knew it would be necessary to travel to Southern Europe, to seek the assistance of Fernando Zappity. It would be easy to do, but it'd cost him some time. The roads were sometimes hazardous and horses in his price range weren't reliable after too much distance. He'd probably have to find horse salesmen that would allow him to trade in his tired horses. Then the journey began, and it turned out that there was a lot more walking involved than Zippity had anticipated. Sometimes the weather was worse than other days. Even after all of the difficulties, he believed that his colleague, Fernando Zappity, could somehow fix the whole situation. Zappity had built a small but respectable position for himself, and now he could vouch for Zippity. The police captain was asking Fernando Zappity, "We have witnesses who have informed us that Edward Zippity visited you at your home, late in the evening. What do you say of this, sir?" A simple explanation, Fernando smiled. "He was in trouble with the authorities, as you well know, and sought me, because of his interest in some of my short stories. I do not know him. I am unsure even of his crimes, but, rest assured, I am not involved with him or his activities, whatsoever. He came to me, because he believed that I could somehow point him to the right path, and I told him he should turn himself into the authorities immediately. That is the most realistic option for anyone in his position." The police captain wanted to make his personal feelings on the subject very clear. "I don't subscribe to any of these magazines that have employed you. These magazines are a subversive cultural element, I believe, and its persuasion is the devil as far as I am concerned." Fernando Zappity was surprised to meet someone who was intolerant of the magazine as an information medium. He agreed with the subversive and persuasive qualities, but he couldn't use that to his advantage. Unless, of course, he came up with a good story. "Let me supplicate your curiosity in the matter. Firstly, let me tell you unequivocally that I agree with your view of magazines in general. In fact, that is why I have taken it upon my own shoulders to try to improve the situation from the inside. We could protest from outside of the medium, but it would do little good, unfortunately. So, accepting some responsibility upon myself, I have taken steps to improve it. The police captain asked warily, and how do you propose to improve it? Fernando Zappity, if my short stories quell the thirst of the readers in a way that other writers do not, they will demand more of the same. Naturally, my competitors will want to take advantage of the new taste, and will find the means to incorporate the flavor, if you will, to their own writing. And this will improve, the police captain asked, the magazine as an influence. It will completely reform it from within, Fernando Zappity thought for a moment and then finished, in 300 years. The police captain broke out into laughter and said, "Oh, all this time I thought you were serious. I now understand this all to me an attempt to make joke out of my opinion." Not at all, Fernando explained, sometimes reform takes time. Sure, 300 years might seem distant, but it will arrive no matter what. I'm putting everything into place now, so that the people of the future will have it better than we do. Later that night, desperate and alone, Edward Zippity returned to Fernando Zappity's house. The police were waiting for him there, because Fernando Zappity told them that the fugitive would return. He turned Zippity into the authorities, to save his own mission. He had temporarily discovered just the right mix of satire, irony, and symbolism to appeal to his literate 18th century audience. Zappity refused to throw it all away, because Zippity had failed to maintain the illusion of normalcy. Instead, Zippity had practically flaunted his alien nature, by developing and distributing self-animating paintings in a world where such things were considered an abomination of the devil. In Fernando Zappity's opinion, Edward Zippity had acted recklessly, and had compromised his own identity. Why should Zappity abandon his own work, because his colleague couldn't handle his mission? The math just would not add up. He owed it to himself, and the gentle empire, to follow through with his own mission, and allow the authorities to take Zippity. If both agents failed, then what would they report to their supervisor? Sorry, we both goofed. Oops. That just wasn't acceptable. Zappity would have to continue his mission, and see it to the completion. Zippity would have to return to the mothership, and apologize on his own. As the authorities were taking Edward Zippity away, Fernando Zappity was heard to say, "You should execute him for crimes against the Church and our Lord." Executing Zippity was the quickest means to send him back to the mothership. Making remarks such as these not only benefited his own standing in the community, but it also assisted Zippity's hasty escape. Zippity didn't seem to understand the suggestion and said, "I'll get you for this, Fernando Zappity." Edward Zippity was scheduled to go to trial because of his involvement with the self-animating paintings. No one accused him of producing them. He has accused of acting as an agent for the devil, a knowing and willing representative of the Dark Prince. Edward had prepared other explanations. He told them, "It isn't magical at all. It is a product of science." The images on the screen changed not according to devilish themes, but by the predetermined script included within the machinery. The prosecutor yelled at Zappity, "We cut open one of your demon relics, and found no machinery, no scripts, nothing that would support your claim." The technology was really there, but it was so small as to defy the human eye's witnessing of it. The machinery was in the fabric of the surface, indistinguishable from ordinary cloth. For the people of 1740, there was no better example of infernal technology than this. Eventually microscopes would be created that could detect the technology, but by then the self-animating paintings would have been completely destroyed. 1.6 Influence. Fernando Zappity's short stories were welcomed by magazines wanting to jump on the bandwagon of his momentary success. He became increasingly bolder in his not-so-subtle messages underneath less concealing symbolism. There were others working in the magazine industry who found his stories appealing to their political taste. Others were unaware that there was a political message, having only read the stories on the surface with the literal props and characters. If anyone came to him and said, "Surely, this character represents the king." Fernando was free to reply, "Perhaps it is you that is reading too much into this. You are clearly projecting your own negative opinions about arcing onto this character from my story. You should be ashamed." A well-respected magazine publisher sent a letter to Fernando Zappity. The publisher was interested in commissioning a book. The short stories that had been published previously by several magazines were consistently respected for the technical expertise in the use of the language. Additionally, the easy-to-follow stories were fun to read, while offering a worthwhile example of some virtue. Unbeknownst to the magazine publisher, however, Fernando Zappity had also provided a secondary parable in every story that would not be obvious, except to the elite few dedicated fans of his work. The most dedicated fans had all of the pieces of the great jigsaw puzzle downloaded into their brains. Not through alien technology, but by reading the delightful stories, and including pieces to the puzzle in the events that don't fit, or the characters who appear for only a few pages for no clear reason. Fernando Zappity had hidden the keys to the puzzle in the shadows of the stories, the places where most readers would more often than not space out. Fernando Zappity was satisfied to receive the invitation to write a book. He quickly penned a letter in response. He explained that one book would be fine, but that a series of 9 volumes would be far more interesting, both from the perspective of the audience as well as his own. He explained in the letter that he had grown weary of writing popular short stories. Instead, he proposed an epic series of books that would span 9 volumes in all. In a return letter, the publisher suggested to Fernando, in the most polite terms possible, that having not yet published one book, perhaps it would be more prudent to try one, and then consider the 9-volume series at a later date. Fernando Zappity, however, in a follow-up letter to the publisher, was quite arrogant and insistent. In the end of the letter, he said that it would be a 9-volume series or else another publisher would be contacted. Naturally, the publisher rejected the offer, because he preferred to be in the position of control over his authors. He told Fernando Zappity in a strongly worded letter that, if he could find a publisher for his 9-volume experiment, then he could only wish them luck dealing with Fernando's overinflated confidence. Fernando Zappity had no reason to take this one rejection too seriously. After all, he was still submitting his short stories to the magazines and there were bound to be more offers. This was assuming, of course, that all of the magazines and book publishers weren't secretly owned by the same multinational corporation. In 1740, such an idea would be considered ludicrous, because there weren't any requirements as to who could start a new publishing company. If he could find some investors, Fernando Zappity could simply start his own publishing company. The other publishing companies might resent Fernando Zappity's entrance into the marketplace, but they couldn't stop him. Under a free market system, there aren't strict rules as to who can buy or sell. Likewise, media conglomerates, while not limited by antitrust laws, would still have no means to stop newcomers from entering the market with a new media product. Fernando Zappity had no reason to worry. He had been preparing for this mission for 10 years. Really, he had been preparing for the 30 years since his last mission to Earth ended so poorly. He was determined to make up for his past mistakes. A few more short stories were published in some of the magazines to which he had been submitting his work. To Fernando Zappity's surprise, however, the magazine editors had also rejected several stories without much more explanation other than they were not right for the moment. Had the unhappy book publisher attempted to discredit Fernando in the literary community? Surely the magazine publishers would want more of his writings now than ever as he was increasing in commercial popularity. Yet, they were telling Fernando that the time was not right for some of his stories. The concerns of the magazine editors would suggest that the content might be troubling to some because of recent events or perhaps due to the current political climate. Fernando Zappity hadn't had time to investigate these forces very thoroughly, unfortunately, and was unwittingly making very bold statements using the fictional characters as his representatives. Many people had trouble separating the writer from his characters, and associated anything written with his own personal opinions. However, very often Fernando Zappity would have characters behaving and speaking contrary to his own nature so as to demonstrate an idea or exemplify a thesis. The fearful misgivings of the editors seemed to multiply and spread over the following months. Fernando had no choice but to submit some of his work through close acquaintances who could be trusted. His own name had become increasingly unwelcome by editors. Had his work gradually desensitized him to the cultural threshold between acceptable literature and the controversial ramblings of a seeming madman? Fernando Zappity wrote a short story about an explorer who sailed across the vast ocean and eventually reached a magical kingdom. The explorer was taken to the grand temple of the people living in the kingdom. He was surprised to discover that their god was a tremendous statue the height of a dozen men. It was a two-headed statue where one head was sculpted in gold and had the features of a dog, while the other head was sculpted in a mix of copper, silver, and nickel and had the head of a cat. The explorer was bewildered by the nature of their god. The explorer asked one of his hosts in the magical kingdom, "Please tell me, good friend, what is the meaning or significance of your god having two heads, one of a dog and the other of a cat?" The host explained, rather ominously, "You already understand it. After all, you can't understand it." The explorer wanted to hear more. "Please tell me why one head is gold and the other is composed of three other metals." "The gold is obvious, of course," the host told the explorer. "The other metals represent those qualities that are brought together in synthesis." The explorer understood the value of gold from whence he came, but what was it that the people of this magical kingdom believed about the nature of gold? He asked, politely, "Does gold represent spiritual purity as the alchemists teach?" The host nodded, "Purity nonetheless." The explorer went back to his ship and took a nap. He dreamt about the height of the great statue that he had seen. It was a man, but with two heads, and these heads were that of a dog and a cat. It was amusing, but also frightening for him. He felt as though the statue was speaking to him from the grand temple. He was asleep and dreaming, but he felt as though he was somehow also awake. He listened attentively to the speaking statue in case its message was somehow important or meaningful to him personally. The giant statue seemed to be telling him, "You are close to understanding my dual nature, but you can't figure it out yet." The explorer listened to the strange words. He knew that he was asleep, but he could hear the voice of the statue as clear as if it was aboard his ship with him. He sensed the rhythm of the sound. The two-headed statue seemed to be speaking. Gold was their standard, then silver, copper, and nickel became their standard. The explorer understood it in economic terms, and asked the statue, "Do you want to negotiate a trade agreement between our two kingdoms?" The statue was speaking, as though it had not heard his request. "Here in the middle, we have discovered the circle of power." The explorer had heard that expression used elsewhere, but he wasn't sure what the statue meant by it. The explorer made a mental note to research the phrase later, when he had woken up from his nap. He wrote it down on a piece of dream paper, but then he folded it up, and it became a bird and flew away. With all of his notes flying into the sky, how could he keep track of tomorrow while it was still today? After awakening from the nap and seeing the strange dream, the explorer questioned the ship's cook about the two-headed statue he had seen in the magical kingdom. The cook seemed knowledgeable on the subject. "For is for Anubis and V is for best, right?" The explorer could only put up his heads. "I guess so." The cook laughed. "The Egyptian statues from the ancient times." The explorer remembered seeing the drawings of those statues, one with the head of a dog and the other with the head of a cat. "There you go," the cook said, "so you got half the mystery solved right there." The explorer then considered the precious metals of which the two-headed statue was made. He told the cook, "The only standard for gold is the one we use for our coinage." The cook told the explorer, "There's been some rumor of a coin made from paper instead of precious metal." The explorer didn't have time to listen to the ship's cook ponder about utopian economic schemes. He said, "That has nothing to do with me. The statue that I saw had a message for me. It said that the circle of power was in the middle." The cook looked thoughtful and eventually said, "It might be trying to say that there is power between silver and gold." The explorer laughed, "Wealth is the root of all power." The cook nodded, "The cat and the dog must be part of this equation." "No," the explorer said, "that wouldn't make any sense." The cook suggested, "Perhaps one of the local people could tell you the significance of the cat and the dog." The explorer nodded understandingly, "Yes, perhaps one of them could enlighten me on this subject." There were a number of peculiar or frightening claims in the fiction. The strangest revelation of all was when Fernando Zappity suggested in a magazine story that the real name of the Ancient of Days is Bluck, an insectoid hive mind from outer space. However, it was presented within the quote marks attributed to a fictional character, so it wasn't meant to be taken literally. That is, it didn't have to be taken literally, even if it really was literally true. 1.7. An angry pelican. Many of Fernando Zappity's stories ended with ominous warnings about the future. One, intended with a little humor, ended with a literal revelation. Barnhill exclaimed with a hearty bellow, "We've done well today." The magical fairy remarked, "I don't think that troll will be bothering us any longer." Trolls, Barnhill reminded her, have the power to regenerate themselves. That pesky troll will be back before too long. We'll stop him as always. Don't let on that you know, the magical fairy warned with disapproval of the boast, lest they hear. The number I'm thinking of is laughing with great energy, Barnhill volleyed a guess, 36. The angry pelican interrupted, "You two don't know anything about it. You can't even restrain the invading insects from building their hive under your feet." The magical fairy, pitying the poor beast, said, "You must be hungry, because you're always talking about those insects you love so much." Growing impatient and needing more action, Barnhill complained, "We can't wait here all day. We need to return to the house and prepare for tomorrow's adventures." The defiant and surly pelican announced, "I'll stay here as long as I like. Someone has to keep a watch in case the insects strike." The magical fairy laughed, "Good riddance." On second thought, the pelican changed its mind. Its tone became an accusation, "You were quick with your insistence to get me out of the way. I can only assume that the two of you have unnatural relations planned." The magical fairy giggled. "It's not that way at all." Barnhill demanded of the nosy pelican, "Why don't you just be quiet for once?" The angry pelican pursued the suspicion, "I hear the whispers. I see the embarrassment." Barnhill had heard enough. "Silent, you bird." The magical fairy applauded the bird for its reasoning, "You know more than even you realize." "No," the bird shook its head, "I can only repeat back words that I've heard others say." "That's unimportant," Barnhill laughed, nervously, "it's time to go prepare for tomorrow's adventures." "Yeah, Barnhill," the magical fairy grinned suspiciously, "let's go." As Barnhill and the magical fairy disappeared into the sunset, the angry pelican could be heard to say, "I'll be here waiting for the insects to invade." The angry pelican wouldn't have long to wait.